Hello, today we're covering 3 short topics. One is about the project, second is about a tip for Helix, and third is about debugging in Rust. But before we jump in, let me say hello and good afternoon. First topic I already mentioned in my previous video, but the topic is a project which is called Graphust. Yes, that's a Graph-easy clone written in Rust, so Graph, Rust, Graphust. The idea for the project is extremely simplistic. I want to use it in conjunction with slides to print out simple graphs for me. So the expected input for the project is what you can see now highlighted, while the expected output will look something like this. And this is the whole idea. And today we're focusing solely on drawing, not actual logic of how to build those graphs. First off, we've got the border type, which is the box currently. This is the only border for the moment. But the important part is, whenever we'll have a border type, we'll also need a border part. So as you can see in here, we've got 6 possible border parts, which is horizontal part, vertical, and the corners. And depending on the type, that will be a different character in the end implementation. So the whole idea is, what we have now, we just yank it and paste it below, and this is the idea of how it will look in the future. Then we've got a node, which is something that is actually presented outside of this module, which is, well, it contains only the border type and the name, or rather the label for that particular node. The most important function for that node will be grab characters. It will grab the characters that needs to be drawn for that particular node. Next step is actually the arrow body. Once again, it will be, well, few different types, but for the moment we've got only the basic one, and also similarly we've got arrow direction. Then we also separate the arrowhead, because the arrowhead can be different than the body type, so we can mix and match in the end implementation. The arrow itself is implemented with having the body, the head, and also 3 points, which is the start, the middle, and the end. So this is exactly what we see in the very beginning, right? This thing. That arrow is like looped around, so we need that middle point to do that. Everything we've covered this far is then wrapped around in a map which contains nodes and arrows. Once again, keep in mind, this is simply for the drawing. Whenever those nodes will be placed, that's a whole different logic which is not enclosed in here. What is, however, enclosed in here is get the picture, or rather grab all of the characters from all of the parts, mash them together, and then create something that can be printed out to the console. And that's the whole thing. Let's see it in action. And in action it looks exactly like this. So this is the output of our cargo run. There's a lot of warnings, but let's just not talk about them for a moment. Alright, this is the gist of the project, so let's move on to the next topic, which is Helix shell command. This is a very simple thing. This is more of a tip than anything else, because I didn't realize, but you can actually run shell commands inside of Helix. What I did previously is, well, exactly what you saw a second ago. I'm just running between 2 tabs that are open from my terminal, and now running cargo run in here. Here we go. But you can actually do that a little bit simpler. You can go sh as in shell command, and then cargo run in here, and this is the output. Important note, this is only the output, or the standard output, right? So all of the warnings and everything else is not printed out, because that is actually printed to standard error, so you will not see that. As you can see, all of those warnings are not included in here. And one more place where this is not so useful, if you want to do cargo test, well, good luck, because you only have a single line in here. That's not very useful. So for cargo test, you will always have to once again switch around to either different terminal or just different, tab. Alright, And the last topic for today is actually Rust debug macro. I mentioned in my previous video that in Helix debugging Rust is not so simple, and I think it's still the case. However, you can actually use debug macro, which is quite fun. Let's see it in action. What you can see now is within the test that failed, I wrapped around creation of the map in the debug macro. What does it change really? Here it prints out three things. So first of all, it prints out where exactly it's placed, which model, which line. Second thing it prints out is really what was the input for that macro. And the last thing is actually the value of that input once it was calculated, so let's call it an output, right? Let's roll that debug macro back. Now we cannot really see it anymore. What I want to show you now is using the same debug macro in very similar place also when we create a map, but in a test that is actually working fine. So when we add the debug macro in here and run the tests again, you actually cannot see that map. And this is the beauty of it. It only prints out whenever the test failed. It's not really specific to debug macro, because that's something that Rust does on default. You don't print anything out from tests that are running okay. However, this is very useful, and this means you can use it whenever you want in your tests. You can also use the debug macro outside of your tests. So here, once again, we're printing out the whole map, but this is actually outside of the testing. If we go and run it over this whole printing of the graph, we can see our map. And bear in mind, by default, the debug macro prints out to standard error, which means you will not see that in the standard output, which is great. The easiest way to present that is actually to redirect the standard output to a file, which we can call right away. So still the debug macro is printed because that's the standard error, and now we can see the file alone actually consists only of that graph. However, bear in mind, since this is still printing to the standard error and the users still can see that, this is really not recommended to keep it in your Git for a long time, right? So the whole spiel and the whole idea is this macro is, well, mainly for debugging, so it's really mainly for your personal needs when you want to debug. And therefore, you actually don't need a full-blown debugger if you'll get used to this, which is still very new to me. Alright, thank you very much guys for paying attention and just being here with me, and as always, we can do better as a pack. Bye everyone.